So, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of the Pure Digital Passion Podcast. I'm your host, Moses Kemibaro. And today we're privileged to have a true trailblazer in Kenya's and Africa's digital transformation journey, Ben Roberts, known for his key role in leading Liquid Telecom's incredible expansion in Kenya and across Africa. He's been at the forefront of championing innovation, STEM education, and new entrepreneurial ventures. Today, we'll explore Ben's journey from his early days in the UK to becoming a technology leader in Kenya and Africa, and his new ventures like Nova Space and Lipagas, and his plans to continue empowering the continent's digital transformation. Thank you for joining us, Ben.
Thank you, Moses. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, Ben, I'd like to get started maybe with your origin story. I mean, you're somebody who's known to us. I think I've known you maybe for the better part of 10 years in the market in Kenya, internet space in particular. But let's go back to early days, back to the UK. What sparked your interest in technology and innovation? Maybe give us some backdrop to that in terms of how that all came about.
Yeah, I mean, look, I came from I was lucky enough to have been in a generation in the UK where we were able to, get to have computers at home, right? So the first generation really where we could get a home computer, start working on things like this. So when I was about 14, I had a computer to play with. And they didn't come with you didn't turn them on and get, fancy screens and graphical user interfaces. You'd get a colon and you'd start typing code in those days. But, I actually, I've told the story a few times in Kenya, but I bought my first computer from delivering newspapers. So I was kind of, when you had this, you had my good friend Brian, he was talking about how he hustled to get his first computer. And
Correct.
Familiar, we're about the same age as well. But, this is, things like this. So I had access to, tools and things you could play with tech and STEM, and doing STEM subjects in school. So we had access to, explore your curiosities with technology. And then, even in high school, I did design technology for O level, and then I was the first cohort in the United Kingdom to do design technology for A level. They hadn't done it before.
Wow.
And then this is kind of a fusion of, woodwork, metalwork, design, physics, maths. It's everything where you were solving design challenges. So having this in the academic curriculum, and alongside that, I'd forgotten about it, and I kind of came to remember it a bit more recently. I did this program within high school called the Engineering Education Scheme, which was an engineering innovation inter-school competition. We worked with local technology companies to sort of define a problem, solve a problem, and then work with local TVETs to build something to solve a problem. And perhaps I'll come back later to why that came back to my memory. But starting out in school, making stuff at home, tinkering with things, taking apart televisions, coding, so really having access to this, even though this is more than 30 years ago, this is the basis for grounding in technology that I have. Yeah.
No, I think you're like a little bit like me. I got my early exposure, I think, at about 12 years old to basic programming, and that formed the foundation of everything. Especially, like I always like to tell people, the moment I figured out that code would allow me to do things in a video game, that you understood how it worked and how it presented itself, then you sort of had this ability to kind of understand how it worked from within, which then really became intriguing. So that's kind of like I also had from the start as well, you know. Brilliant. So you went to do physics at the University of Bristol, and I'm just wondering whether that and perhaps, going forward to Ericsson and Lotus, how those two things connect.
So I actually went to Lotus before studying physics. So having
Okay.
done this, I studied. I also took physics A level, but I got a place to go and study physics. But as a follow-on from this engineering competition within school, they then offered this pre-university placement in engineering. So I went to cars before joining high school, and before joining university, after high school, and it was very, grassroots engineering. We didn't really have much knowledge, but really opened my eyes up to to working in industry. And then I was then offered by my supervisor, a place to study engineering at university. And then I said, no, no, let me stick with the physics. Then, studied physics and then became an engineer. So it's, all very strange. But I think that the difference, what I appreciate from having studied with physics and having worked in tech, particularly in comms, with a very fast-paced, evolving technologies. Particularly in Africa, we've been working satellite and fiber and everything else. But with physics, you kind of get the basic understanding and grounding of the principles that everything is works on, right? So much as I spent a lot of time working on radio frequencies and satellites, when it came to studying with fiber, you understand the basics because you've studied optics and photons and lasers. Whereas if you'd studied engineering 30 years ago, you would have studied a bunch of very specific things around what was engineering 30 years ago. So it wouldn't necessarily be quite so adaptive. So I tend to like physicists and hiring them because I know that if you studied it well and the maths behind it, you know that something will carry you through. And then having studied physics, then I said I got a job that happened to be engineering. Before I went to Ericsson, I worked in components, making electronic components.
Wow.
It was a company in UK making DC-DC converters, and I thought it'd be really exciting, right? And that I'd get this job. I got this job as a development engineer, and I thought I'd be thinking of new ideas and new innovations. But it turned out this company had invented this product like 15 years when it started and started making them. Then it had started manufacturing them at volume in the UK, and they found the volume was too high, so it had gone to China for volume manufacturing. And then the Chinese companies that they'd asked to manufacture then started copying the products and came in manufacturing competing. So my job was to get the Chinese competitors' products and melt them down and see how we can make them better than the Chinese competitors. So copying the copies, largely, and really not inventing anything new, but just saying, how do we make this thing better? How do we make, use different components, make the board smaller, increase the power, increase the resilience, and find better ways to manufacture the components. So, this is why I talk a lot about the difference between, revolutionary innovation and evolutionary innovation. It's very much, this job was in this space. But then got more into the software side of things, programming, a lot more programming in C, developing automatic test equipment. That then took me to Ericsson, which is really then early days of communications. Before 1G, we were doing radio paging networks. So we were sending very small character messages to radio pagers. People have forgotten about pagers until recently, and then a lot of people are asking me about how pagers can work. I know a lot about it, but we were using satellite communications to distribute to pagers. Satellites really, this is also making me laugh about the current debates around Starlink and direct to device and how you can get coverage anywhere. Because pagers, we'd use a satellite to get to base stations and cover the whole of a country, 100% coverage. So any emergency service worker could be paged anywhere, So, but very quickly, and then I saw how quickly technology can die. Because the minute we had 1G networks, but the minute people started sending SMS and were sending messages from their mobile phones, we've been working on two-way paging. We've been working on how to get pagers to send messages back. And then we just cancelled all of that. And the company basically, within 2 years, stopped doing paging completely because the bottom fell out of that technology so fast. There was no need for pagers anymore. There was no more R&D. There was no more investment into paging networks. So
literally disruption right there.
Yeah. It's that's the fastest obsolescence of a technology I've seen. We're seeing a lot of things in Africa. We recycle technologies, but paging just went, just dropped off a cliff.
You didn't even have a chance to come here, really.
We did pivot into doing satellite comms, so that's kind of did bring me into doing some of the things I did in Africa,
So,
and being useful. Yeah.
so let me get this straight. So you're at Ericsson, you're still in the UK at this point. You've not yet come to Africa. And I'm really kind of interested to hear how you ended up here and how that journey began that brought you here.
Yeah. So look, another. I guess then from drifting like Forrest Gump between technologies, I then moved from Ericsson into, which had been more satellite paging, but I moved into this technology called voice over IP.
Yeah.
The original days of trunking voice over internet. I'd been doing some of these things in Ericsson over satellite as well, so integrating internet protocols over satellite. I moved into this company doing this, and was supporting a bunch of companies all over the world. Some of them were in Africa. I remember we were South Africa, Cameroon. I was, talking to customers online, helping them with their experiences in Africa, and that is what kind of brought me into this, because then when Liquid was setting up, they had invested in this very specific technology from this company I work for, and they said, we want a voice over IP engineer who has experience of this particular platform. And I'd
Yeah.
been working in this as an expert for like 3 or 4 years, and then kind of fitted straight in. At that time as well, the European office had closed down of this company, so they didn't really have much support from the vendor. But I was able, because I've been working at the vendor, able to, come in. Literally, they had a pile of boxes, and this was Liquid Telecom. 101. We were called eConnect Carrier Services, but they'd built a satellite dish which was plugged in and was pointing at the sky. But then on the baseband equipment, the communications equipment, there was a pile of boxes. There was another engineer started the day after me, and we kind of got everything out of the boxes, plugged it in, and made it work, and sent the first voice over IP calls over our network to Nigeria, Lesotho, and that's how we started, right? In those days, voice was quite profitable if you were doing international voice. Before WhatsApp and Skype came and disrupted that market. So we just plugged it in and you start printing money, right? Because you're sending voice traffic to Africa. There was a very high demand. And that technology, that voice over IP, was very efficient. We were able to do use a satellite bandwidth very efficiently and do it cheaper than other competitors that had been around in the market for a long time. So that's kind of what brought me into doing stuff in Africa. It was Lesotho, Nigeria, Zimbabwe were the first countries that we interconnected, and working out of London, a big satellite dish in Hertfordshire, and then that's how Liquid started. That's how I started working in Africa. Yeah, but it was the experience that helped. Working in a company where we've been supporting customers in Africa helped, because when you're in satellite links, you're dealing with someone on the other side. You're on the phone or you're on a messenger program or something. You're chatting about how you're troubleshooting together. So that's how it started. Yeah, and then it just grew a bit.
So at this point in time, where you actually sitting in Africa? Are you sitting in South Africa? Is this in Zimbabwe? Yeah. Okay.
Started in Hertfordshire, where we had the satellite dishes, and then
I see.
yeah, so we moved our offices to London at some point then, but we left the technical operations were in Hertfordshire, where we had these, in a green field somewhere where there were satellite dishes, and then we moved some of our stuff into London, in the data centers in London. So we moved the office a bit closer to where that was, and doing. I started to travel. Like we had to go and train some of the engineers in Africa. I remember going to Lesotho in like 2003, I think, to go and that was my first business trip to Africa, to go and train engineers in Lesotho about how to support the other end of this platform. Nigeria, I had a lot of started to travel in Nigeria and other places, doing project work. So I would go somewhere, for a week or 2 weeks to do a project, work with engineers, training, handover. Um, so it's kind of like that until about 2006. They got more intense. Then it became like you're on a plane, you're in Africa 2 weeks out of 4. It became quite a lot.
Mm.
Being to Kenya, it made a lot of better life. That was in 2013, but it made a better balance, right? Because you were no longer spending quite so much time on the aeroplane because you're actually based in the continent rather than jumping around doing long haul flights all the time.
What year was this?
2013, I came here. Yeah, so we looked at around about early 2013. We started looking at late 2012, I think. We started looking at Kenya data networks. It became available on the market. The assets of Altec East Africa were on the market. Altec were a South African company, and they'd invested in Kenya Data Networks and a few other companies, Rwanda, Uganda. So we started looking at that. It was very similar to what Liquid had done. Liquid by now had started building fiber. We'd invested in fiber communications, building fiber into Zimbabwe. KDN had done something very similar. So they had built, they'd extended from the landing stations in Mombasa, they'd extended to Nairobi. They'd built a data center in Nairobi, but then they'd gone to Kampala, Kigali. It was really similar to what Liquid had done, extending fiber from landing stations in South Africa we built into Zimbabwe and Zambia and DRC. So, we merged as companies, or we acquired these companies, and I was traveling more and more. And then eventually they said, "Hey, do you want to go and spend a bit of time there for 6 months in Kenya?" So I accepted, and I am still here.
And that's what, like 12 years later or something.
12 years, yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
So I came in
So,
November 2013, yeah.
so you at this point in time, are you now the CEO of Liquid in Kenya? What's your position at this point?
Yeah, so I was actually I came as originally when I was coming I was coming as CTO. We were forming the networks of Kenya and East Africa and the products, and then but when I came here to stay, they said I'll just come and be acting CEO for a few months. I had I had a few friends in Kenya already, but when I came, but one particular one, and you'll know her, Becky Wanjiku. She said to me,
Yeah, yeah.
"Now you're coming to Kenya. I hope you'll be really involved in the tech ecosystem. Because she
Mm.
each other from technical forums and stuff. I unfortunately, because I was then coming as a CEO and trying to turn around the business, I didn't get immersed into Kenya's tech ecosystem as I probably should have done. And I wish I'd listened to Becky a bit more that one and tried to do a bit more. But then I carried on being. I was still having dual roles actually, but CTO of the group was my other role. But I left it behind. I really left a team really running most things, and I focused
Yeah.
on turning around the Kenyan business. But then after 2017, 2020 years, after then my job was done really. We'd done the reform, the turning around of the business, establishing Kenya as a hub in the region. I then went back to just being full-time technology as CTO. But then is when I remembered Becky's advice and said, let me see if I can start getting more into what's happening in tech scene at home, right? So immersing really into what's going on in the innovation technology scene in the country as well.
No, I think you become kind of like a fixture, or you become very synonymous with, I think, the education space and technology, the general conversations around technology, internet, and so forth. I think in this region, you don't have those conversations not been there. That's my sense. You seem to have like a really intimate understanding of what's happening on the ground. I know I've been with you. I think previously, was it last year or the year before, with the EdTech TV show, and when I was hosting that, you're one of our guests. And I just want to get a sense of that, because I know you have an interest in STEM, but how did that happen?
So I started to think about the I started to think about, we're here to solve problems. If you're here innovating and you're in tech, you're here to solve problems. I started thinking about the hard problems, right? We've solved a lot of problems while we're at Liquid. We solved a transition to satellite to fiber. We solved a whole bunch of things, how to bring in data centers, invest in data centers, and traversing different technology paths. We didn't get everything right, and we didn't really. We jumped into the money side. We jumped into payment terminals at the time when mobile money was obviously, the much faster moving technology. But I started to think about what haven't we done, right? So if you go to a country where there's fiber connectivity, there's countries that Liquid has invested in, you'll find that um, there are every business, every large building is connected. All the banks, all the branches are all connected. But somehow schools have been left behind. Every university is connected to campuses by Kennet in Kenya. There's no place where you don't have high-speed connectivity, except schools haven't been connected. And so I started to wonder why, right? And then I actually started this curiosity in 2014, and I started to find out where is all the data on where the schools are? And nobody knew. I went for lunch with Ambassador, or he wasn't Ambassador at the time, but Ambassador, Professor Ndemo. And I said, Prof, where is where can I find out where the schools are? So he said, well, I can tell you where they are, and it's on Kenya Open Data Project. And here, that's where you can get the data. So I got the data where the schools are in Kenya, a data set of about 30,000 schools, and did some analysis to work out, where they were in relation to the fiber networks. Discovered that in 2014 that 5,000 schools were within 1 kilometer of a Liquid Telecom fiber. Yet still, 10 years later, we still haven't connected them. So this really got my curiosity going, and in the space of just pure connectivity for education, and we partnered with UNICEF and the Giga project. I'm still working with UNICEF and Giga around some interesting projects they have, advising on some potential projects that they have to enhance connectivity for education. But then I really got more immersed into this area of STEM. I got invited in 2019 to the finals or the closing ceremony of Young Scientist Kenya. I went in and I saw what some of the projects, innovative projects that are being done by high school students in Kenya, and saw what's going on, saw how Young Scientist Kenya has really been, they were 3 years old then, but it was starting to really, influence the way that people don't just learn books of STEM, but apply STEM. And we had I remember a very rousing speech from a guy who was deputy president of Kenya at the time. He's now the president of Kenya, and he was there at the closing ceremony. And he was saying about, that Kenya, only 25% of university graduates are taking STEM subjects. Whereas global average is like 50% or something. So, this is perhaps an indicator of, what we need to be doing to grow a tech economy, right? And then I remembered back, and then I saw some of these projects from high school. I remembered back to this thing I did in school, and I said this engineering education scheme. And this is what I'd done, is I'd forgotten all about it. But actually, not just doing your book work, but actually applying, finding a problem, building something and writing designs and coding and stuff, So I kind of got involved in that. Now I'm the board chair of Young Scientist Kenya. I'm very passionate about this, in education, how we can transform education. But it does start from connectivity, right? It starts from that infrastructure for connectivity. You can't really expect to digitize education if you're not connected. And now that means people being left behind and people not having access to technologies that you need in the 21st century. I had access to a computer when I was 14, 30 years ago. and we have kids in school who don't have access to computers at all at home or at school. And how do we expect them to, um, get digital jobs in the digital age, right? If you don't have that access.
Also interesting, maybe to hear from you. During your time as CTO at Liquid, where you are no longer based. But what was that like? Because that was a pretty long period of time. What was happening on the ground? What is the proliferation of the networks like? What are the challenges? What are the things that you saw during that tenure?
Yeah, so the challenges have been some big technology. Challenges and opportunities have been, big technology shifts, mega shifts in technology, in communications and the way we communicate, and other things coming on top of the way we communicate, such as mobile money. So the big mega trends have been, we've had this shift from satellite to fiber, and now we're going back to satellite. Um, and then even in computing, it was mainframes to edge to cloud. So we're seeing shifting technology as to where the compute power is, right? If it's in your hand or your desk, or if it's in the cloud. We're seeing also voice shifting to data. So even data being a transporter of voice, but now people are using WhatsApp for voice. They're using a lot of messaging. So that one, and then of course the huge emergence of mobile money. So these are the mega technology shifts, and then um, a kind of Africa from a connectivity point of view, skipping a generation in terms of fixed line networks. Never places never having copper networks, going straight to fiber networks, and the challenges around that, the investment challenges around that, and all the other unique African challenges that we have, such as elephants trampling fiber and other things that we have. My favorite one, we talk a lot about the elephants, but my favorite one was there was an area in, I won't name the country, it's a country 2 hour west,
Okay.
Kenya, and a country to the west of us, where the locals kept disturbing the fiber. They kept digging it up and causing problems. And at some point, a solution was devised where a witch doctor was hired to curse the fiber, so the locals would leave it alone. Um, this stuff is real. Yeah?
Whatever it takes, get that fiber out there. Oh, fantastic. I'm also curious just to maybe talk a little bit about where we are today. And I think you left, so have not been in Liquid now for a few months. I'd like to know a little bit more about that and also what you're currently doing.
Yeah, so I am. I finally I announced it really in August, but I finally finished yeah, just a few weeks ago, in the middle of November, about 3 weeks ago. And so I am trying to be useful. I'm trying to use the knowledge and experience I've gained to help people, with um, digital projects that are meaningful and have growth potential. So I've started a company called Digital Economy Advisors, which is me and a few other colleagues that I've working, but also working with other partners best in field, advising companies on different things, large infrastructure projects that need investment. If you're doing anything like large infrastructure, you need to raise a lot of money. You need to be doing this with good governance and good governance from the outset. So this is key. I think a lot of my time at Liquid is doing things in the right way. Right, it's not about just doing things in a rush and doing it poor engineering, poor cutting shortcuts. So we're looking at large infrastructure projects, looking at helping companies expand into Africa via Kenya. So Kenya is like it's like a proving ground and we talk about gateway to East Africa, but it's not just it's not a gateway to East Africa. It's a gateway to Africa. Meg Whitman would talk about that a lot. Like, it is an entry point into a continent of 1.5 billion people. So if you're trying something in tech, it's like New York, New York. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So that is why people are coming to Kenya to test out and pilot new innovations. Rwanda as well, but it's coming. That's a much smaller market, right? So helping companies who are starting in Kenya expanding into Africa with the right partnerships, the right experience of what not to do, what to do. Again, I'm working with, been working with some sort of digital government projects, advising on these digital public infrastructure projects. This is kind of what I want to be doing. I have some startups in Kenya, so I'll be focusing on certain segments, but I'm very interested in manufacturing, electronics manufacturing. You might see me talking about this a lot. Last week we had a session at Silicon Exchange, which was an event here. American investors came, but I see potential. I see huge potential, and this is a niche area. Not many people in Kenya have done electronics manufacturing. I'm one of the very few, having been making components in my early career, who's done this, right? So helping that. I have two startups as well, which I have announced, which is Lipagas, which is an innovative pay-as-you-go gas startup, looking at transition of clean cooking from people cooking with firewood, cooking to LPG gas, helping with the financing around that using technology. So fintech, building on the mobile money platforms and IoT platforms that I get so excited about. And Nova Space is in the education area. We are doing virtual reality training for technical training
Well,
within TVETs. I have an amazing team who have built super high quality content in like fully interactive 3D models, all in Kenya. And team, it's software designers, 3D modelers. So we're building this stuff locally. So we're looking to expand that, and not just not even just for Kenyan markets. If we can create content like this, 3D models, we can market this content anywhere in the world. So quite excited about those two. But there are other things I'm working on in the customers and clients that I'm working on that I haven't talked about so much. But that's kind of what I want to do, right? It's saying, how do you use that experience in tech to enable, build teams, build companies, to do exciting stuff with technology, and hopefully make some money.
hopefully. I mean, it really looks like there's a lot going on. I mean, one would think maybe you're slowing down, but it seems like you're accelerating towards more things. That's the sense I'm getting.
Yeah, the reports of my farming were seriously exaggerated, I, and I didn't do as much farming as I intended to do. Um, but yeah, well, I think in many ways I will focus, but having made a change, I'm throwing a lot of balls up in the air and see what works out. I think there's a lot of potential with infrastructure, right? So even something as simple as this, like Kenya, even there's an initiative from the government to build 100,000 kilometers of fiber in Nigeria. There's another initiative from the government to build 90,000 kilometers of fiber. There's a lot of interest in investing in data centers across the continent, and there even in subsea cables. Kenya's got 7 subsea cables, but there are countries in West Africa that only have 1 subsea cable connected. And when that goes down, they could be offline for weeks. There's one island which has only got 1 cable. I mean, literally, if that is cut, they will have no connectivity whatsoever. We do need still to invest billions of dollars in infrastructure, and that has to be done, as I say, with good governance, with good experience, good engineering, right? So I think I doubt I'm going to not be busy. I guess one day one might think about retiring and actually doing some farming. Yeah, I think at the moment it's quite an exciting time.
Listening to what you're saying, and if I'm hearing you correctly, essentially what you're saying is that there's a lot of foundational stuff to still sort out. I mean, if you're saying a country only has one cable and they go down and they're off, that means literally just building the most basic pipe stroke infrastructure is still a massive undertaking that it still has to be done, right?
Yeah. No, no, exactly. One of the countries, I won't mention now, but one of the countries that that I'm talking about here, I went to a workshop last year in Europe, and there was somebody from the ministry of this particular country there, and they asked people at this workshop. It was and we were talking about education and connectivity. They asked, what would need to be done to digitally transform this particular country. And took one look at it. I said, well, you need more than one subsea cable, right? Because you can't then digitally transform and then a trawler comes along and then you're offline for 3 weeks. It can't be like that. And then this is going back to the experiences in Kenya. We got subsea cables came in 2007, 2008. By the time I got here in 2013, we had subsea cables, but there were two. There were three subsea cables, but Kenya Data Networks was providing services because one was cheaper than the other. So they were providing services to customers. They were saying, customers, you buy CCOM services and you buy Teams services. So then, if you're like let's say a bank or something, you don't really care about subsea cables. Suddenly one gets cut, and then all your banks are offline. You can't say, oh, I want the CCOM one now. Well, that's more expensive. So we had to build networks resiliently. You can't say, okay, this fiber is cheaper than this one, so I'll sell it as another product, and this one is a cheaper product. It's not like that. When you're in the enterprise space, enterprises need resilient, reliable connectivity. You can't do that without diversity, without redundancy, and then design, right? Solid design in the way that you build your networks, the way that you interconnect with people. We have more options now than we had then, but some of these countries in West Africa are still not had as much investment come in. Right, we've had a lot of investments come into Kenya, and some countries have not. So the development finance is looking to how to solve this. They're looking at not leaving countries behind out of the digital age. So again, in doing large development projects, like our friends, we were together on the EdTech show with our friends from Development Finance World. They need they need experience not just of building, but how to make models that work, models and partnerships that work and are sustainable. It's not just about lending money to governments for them to do things. You need to do this in ways where you partner with telcos, with other infrastructure providers. This is where what is going on right now. There are gaps. There are gaps in the connectivity across the continent. There were three. There was a study about a few years ago from the Broadband Commission came out, and it was there's this graph of the amount of capital that needs to be deployed in Africa to have universal broadband by 2030, and I can't remember the number. It's a big number in the billions of dollars. But there were three countries: Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Democratic Republic of Congo. Those three countries, very populous countries, very large countries. Between them, 50% of the capital, according to this study, has to be deployed to get universal broadband, has to go into those three countries. And the other 50% of capital is to the other 51 countries of Africa. So we've got tremendous challenges. And so, hopefully us original guys will be useful if we know what we did before. We'll learn new lessons, but also not make the same mistakes.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I really love what you're saying. I mean, I almost want to feel like calling you, Ben is the full stack guy. He looks at everything at every layer. And it's not just about the wonderful possibilities when you get to the applications or the mobile app. What underpins all of that? What makes that all possible? And then the issue of resilience and the fact that you even come from a history of building the actual technology that makes these things possible, I think you really do see the full stack, and how it all interworks and works across the board. I think as we come towards the end of our conversation, Ben, I think I have two more questions that I think are really critical. One is, based on the time you spent on the ground in Kenya, across Africa, what are some of the key takeaways that you think would be really important for our audience to hear about in terms of your perspectives and views on the infrastructure around technology and maybe even policy and issues of that nature? And then secondly, what are the things that you see going forward, both in what you're doing right now and also within the broader perspective, thinking about maybe 5, 10 years down the road? What are the things that we can anticipate across, Kenya and the African continent?
Yeah, I mean, from a Kenya perspective, we have um, two very key assets, right, in the digital space. Number one, you'll hear a lot of talk from our president about green energy, right? You're hearing this, and you're hearing about linkages to data centers and other things that are being investment into Kenya. Now, if Kenya didn't have that grounding on reliable infrastructure that it had, it wouldn't even be considered for using that green energy for data centers and technology. But this green energy is impressive, right? The grid we have, the percentage of the grid power is around 85% green energy from geothermal, wind, and everything else. But in terms of geothermal energy, Kenya's like sixth in the world. Everybody thinks of Iceland and volcanoes. Kenya's ahead of Iceland. It's a small country, right? But so we're really doing really well in green energy, right? So and potential for more. So the world, as it's looking towards artificial intelligence, is looking for green energy because these companies can't carry on burning the world's resources to create models to serve the internet for us. So that's a huge asset, but I think it's going to shape the technology future of Kenya a lot and the rest of Africa, and really make potential for Kenya it's already a connectivity hub, but can we become an AI hub? There were probably 4 or 5 countries in the continent who have potential to really use AI at scale and do AI research. And I think collaborations between Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, these countries have got much more advanced technological platforms, infrastructure, human capital. And so then we come to, that human capital, and we have, coming out of school, coming out of high school education, or coming out of education generally into the workplace every year, we have 1 million people coming into the adulthood. I mean, this is staggering. Now it's a somehow it's a threat to some of the things we have, and these people the young people are going to get very frustrated, and we've seen their frustrations in the summer. But in a world that is going to be influenced by tech, we better be able to give them access to tech. Otherwise, they're going to be more frustrated, right? So there really is potential to create jobs and other things. That it's not the only challenge. I understand we've got a lot of other difficulties to solve, even food security and other things. Yeah? But let me stick to. I'm not yet a farmer. Let me stick to my lane and work on tech. You see where Kenya has at least got to with the tech industry, and what connectivity and ubiquitous mobile money have enabled, and you see now that our friends in the East African community, are trying to follow the same models, and so I think it's a huge potential, and we shouldn't look, Kenyans seem to get jealous if they hear something good happens in Tanzania, and then they get really annoyed about it. And the president the other day was complimenting Tanzania, and then everyone was saying, "Oh, why is he doing that?" But really, it takes a village to raise a child, they say, don't they? But you've got to look at it on a regional basis.
Mm.
These countries in East Africa, they weren't even separate countries until some other people came and drew borders with straight lines. So I think you have to look at it as what is this? Where is tech going in this region? Look at it at a continental level. Look at it at a regional level. I like to think of everything like that way, and not think about if we're building infrastructure for cloud in Kenya, we're building it for all of East Africa. This is the philosophy, right? So we kind of let us bring our friends from the south, the east, the west, the north. Let us bring them along in our journey of digitization, and see how everybody can work together.
Brilliant. Maybe as we come to wrap up, maybe my last question to you would be somewhat your parting shot. And I think I'd like this to maybe focus on those thinking about careers in technology, especially the youth, younger people. I know you have a passion for education and young people. And maybe anything else that you think would be of value to our audience in terms of thinking about the bigger picture around technology and digital infrastructure, the internet, and so forth within the Kenyan and African context.
Yeah, I mean, you know, two young people that are looking at getting into tech. I would. Uh, there's lots of exciting careers to do, and what is going to matter is those you have to do your obviously you pass your exams and do your books. We might have some areas of that study that may not seem relevant, and possibly it's not. But I tend to be hiring people who've done things in extracurricular activities, who've done projects, campus code clubs, whatever. Huge, tremendous opportunities, and so getting online and using those things. Is really key. And if you don't have the tools, if you don't have the computers or the connectivity or access to places to make things and whatever, demand it. Like, get on there and demand. I might send to you a photograph. There's a photograph I have when I was in school, a very ordinary school I went to in the UK, government school, where I'm 17 years old and I'm surrounded by oscilloscopes and soldering irons and signal generators and stuff like this. If not everybody who's in the education process can have access to such tools as well as the computer I had. But if you don't and you want to do something in tech, bang down somebody's door and demand it. Come and say, right, I want internship, I want this, I want to use a lab, I want because it's not going to be given to you, right? It's going to be people who want to get into tech. You're going to have to come and knock on someone's door and demand. And I'm not. I saw your last question, but I am. I'm not going to give out my phone number on this. How you can contact me, but I do. I do have some young people who are mentoring with what they're doing in their tech hustles as well as I'm investing in. I'm quite accessible within tech circles. There are ways to find me, and I'm really excited to support people who are going to get off and do something. Right? So I'm tremendously back to this thing of electronics manufacturing. I'm seeing people starting to make stuff. Right? I don't know why we didn't make stuff before, but in the last 5 years, since I got interested in Internet of Things, been involved in this community, helping people make electronics, make gadgets, program the software for gadgets. That we have. You combine that with the green energy, right? You combine that with this. We have this electricity, this green energy. We've got natural resources, human resources. There's other minerals in the ground. It's harder to make products from some of the minerals we have, but the technology now with AI and the internet, we have access to the designs, to the technology. So let's use it, right? Let's take the opportunity we have, use the resources that are available. So it's exciting times, Moses. It's a great time to be in tech. I think you must see it as a tech watcher. There's a lot of things going on. Yeah.
No, it's never been more exciting. And I always tell people, like, sometimes it feels, I mean, I've been doing this stuff for 25 plus years now, and it feels like we're still getting started. We're just scratching the surface. Like you said, I mean, if interconnectivity is the foundation of digital transformation, basic infrastructure to get connected to anything is where you start, and Africa has a dearth of that problem, then we have a long way to go. It's going to be at least another 25 years before we can say that we've arrived. And then combine this with the climate issues and green energy, and you just feel that Africa, and in particular probably Kenya, is well poised to really play a major role globally in some of these spaces. Um,
But even that green energy, we import so much oil to drive cars. If you use that green energy, for EVs now, it's total economic transformation of, you're now doing transport from your own resources and not from somebody else's resources you're importing. It changes the potential completely, completely.
yeah, I mean, just imagine the possibility that your vehicles and your EVs down the road are powered with local energy from the grid, from green sources. I mean, that is a radical idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Ben, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy guy, and I'm so delighted you gave us this opportunity to give us this chance to talk to us. I know there's so much more to unpack about who you are and what you've done and what you're planning to do. But all I can say is that we're cheering you on. You very much become part of the fabric of the technology ecosystem in Kenya and Africa, and we can't wait to see what else you will be doing, with all the new things you're getting into.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's I wouldn't be. I would say that that technology ecosystem in Kenya has been very welcoming. I wouldn't be part of it if people hadn't been so hospitable. It is where we hang out and where most of my friends are.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks so much. And once again, to our audience, thank you for joining us for another edition of the People the Passion podcast, where we have a conversation with great guys like Ben, who are really at the heart of technology in Kenya and Africa. And we can't wait to catch you in the next one.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Moses.